Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Owen. I'm the editor of Punchline. So welcome along to this, all you ladies, lovely ladies and gentlemen. This is the second Q&A that we've done in a series of the county's MPs. We actually have arranged to do every single MP to come on board, which I'm really actually completely chuffed with, as you can imagine. So keep an eye out for dates. Just need to bottom that out. Today it's the turn of Alex. And obviously an MP for Cheltenham, and a big hello, Alex.
Hello. My goodness, I think I know pretty much everyone on this call. I can see Rowena, I can see Sam Holiday, Steve, Nigel. Isn't Nigel not? And poor Kevan. You've heard some of the jokes already about a million times. Great. Well, look, it's really good to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Mark. The most important thing is there are more people on this call than there were on Richard Graham's. That is the most important thing, right?
And before you get started, Alex, sorry to stop you in your flow there. I just want to say a big thank you to our sponsors, because without our sponsors, which are Evans Jones, without them, who are chartered surveyors and planning consultants, without them, we couldn't do this type of thing, as you can imagine. And I'd also like to welcome David Jones, but also a big thank you to Joanne as well to helping me organise this. So a big thank you to you guys. The way the format's going to work is that obviously I'm going to chair it and all the rest of it. I've got a list of questions here. Alex will start off and give us 5 or 10 minutes of what he thinks about what's happening in Parliament, what he thinks the future of Cheltenham is, and then we'll start the first question with David Jones, followed by Sam Holiday, followed by Kevan Blackadder, and then I'll go for the list as you all signed up, if that's okay. Okie dokie. Sorry,
Great.
Alex, over to you, sir.
No. Well, look, thank you very much, and thank you to you for organising this and the sponsors and so on. It's absolutely great to be here, and it genuinely is such a pleasure to see so many old faces. And I just want to say, I don't want to spend too much time talking, because questions are really where it's interesting and illuminating and fun. So let me just say a few remarks. You asked me to talk about Parliament. Of course, Parliament's going to sit back next week. That's important because of the message it sends out. There's going to be some logistical issues about how we do important things like voting, but we'll worry about that when we get there on Monday. But just so you're aware of the sorts of things that I've got to be focused on, because it may then elicit some questions. In the MOJ, my responsibility is for three things during this COVID crisis. One is I luxuriate in the title of the Minister of Death. So I have to deal with death management, which is all the grisly stuff to do with funeral capacity and crematoria and all that kind of stuff. So that's, I run something called the Death Management Programme. So that's, if you're interested in that, you can talk about that. Second, I do legal aid, so family law as well. So I'm particularly concerned at the moment how we can ensure that those providers who do really important work, which no one is interested in until they're interested in, if you know what I mean, until it becomes a real important issue for them, keeping the show on the road for them is critically important as well. And then, of course, I'm also particularly concerned with getting the courts up and running as well within the Ministry of Justice. So that's just by way of overview there. Final thing I wanted to say about next week is I'm also going to be taking through the domestic abuse bill. Some of you may be aware that during this whole crisis, one of the particularly unhappy consequences has been the impact on domestic abuse. And so we're going to be bringing that into law. Now, in fact, it was going to be brought into law regardless of COVID. So it's actually rather kind of opportune timing, but it's really important. And I won't bore you with all the relative elements of it, but suffice it to say, for these purposes, it's an absolute step change in terms of the protection we provide to victims of domestic abuse. Usually women, not exclusively women, but usually women. So that's a really positive thing, but it's complicated, and it's lots of debates going to be taking place next week. I'll be leading in the Commons. So there you go. That's the national stuff, and we can talk in due course about the R rate and everything else, but I'm not going to dwell any more on that unless you want to raise it. Let me just deal with the issue of Cheltenham, if I may, and Gloucestershire more widely. I said this yesterday, so apologies to those who were on the call. I wrote in an article in the Echo some time ago now. I probably timed it wrong, actually. I should probably have written it now rather than then. That as we're looking to come out of all this, I reminded myself of the history from the 1930s when, you know, FDR, the height of the US Depression, said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And what we've got to do is we effectively need to build our way out of the economic problems that the United States was in at that time. And you'll remember in the 1930s, there was appalling unemployment. And there was a very clear decision taken that whilst, of course, you could, as his predecessor, the president had done, effectively turn off the spending taps from government and live within your much more modest means, or you could seek to reflate the economy by sticking with and enhancing big infrastructure schemes. So in the States, they had I'm not going to, the Hoover Dam and all those sorts of things. But in Gloucestershire, it's not too grandiose to say we have the beginnings of our own little mini New Deal because of the money that is earmarked for the town in terms of investment, which we've got to hold on to and we've got to continue to fight for. But I'm thinking, of course, of the cyber park, the £23 million, so the work that will be done to make Junction 11 more accessible. And then, remarkably, don't report this, please, Mark, but I was pleasantly surprised that we got that cash for Junction 10. I thought it was going to be a really big ask, but we've got it, and we've got to hold on to it. Why? One, because it makes Cheltenham's liability an asset. What I mean by that is liability was that it's not really the Midlands, it's not really the Southwest, it's not really the Thames Valley, and it certainly isn't Wales. If you get those things sorted out, it's the best place in the world for all of those places. And I really think that, yes, in the short term, we're going to have some difficult times. Of course, we're going to have some difficult times, and it may be the high street will look different. And I have some really clear ideas, by the way, about what we should do in respect to that, which you might want to ask me about. But in the long term, if we get the infrastructure bits right, then as we start to move towards this new normal, as we start to zoom more in our businesses, why are people actually going to want to be in London? They're going to want to be in places like Cheltenham. And I think we're going to have a great opportunity to build a really successful, modern economy. And that's what the focus has got to be. And I think that actually we're better placed than most to be quite positive. So it's going to be really tough. The final point I'll make, just by way of preliminary remarks, is though it's going to be tough, the thing that in some ways I take most pride in is that in a town like Cheltenham, £24 million has gone towards supporting businesses in retail, hospitality and leisure and so on. And to put that in context, the entire budget for the Borough Council is about 12 million, right? So double that figure has gone into hundreds and hundreds of local businesses. And I feel really, really proud about that, because if you take that together with a furlough scheme, I hope that they will be in a position to start to reheat gradually as the economy starts to unlock. So,
Steve Jordan.
is there Steve Jordan on the call as well? I didn't hear that. But so that's good news, and I'm really pleased about that. And let's hope, and I feel reasonably confident that even if there are going to be some difficulties in the short term, in the long term, Cheltenham is very well placed to be a thriving, happy and successful local community. So with those opening remarks, over to you, Mark.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks ever so much, Alex. I'm sure that some people would like to ask you a few questions of that, but let's start with David Evans-Jones. David, if you'd like to give us your first question, please, and after that we'll go on to Sam Holliday. Okay, so David.
Of course, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Alex. Yeah, some great comments there, particularly Junction 10. I think I was in discussion with some people this morning about Junction 10 and any risks that the funding could be stalled or pulled. So it'd be really interesting to get perhaps your insight on that. But responding to another point you made, really with regard to the high street.
Yeah.
Town planner, as you know, I speak regularly on the high street and I'm passionate about it. The importance of placemaking, the need to bring people back into the town and town centres. Yeah. However, analysts this week have reported expected vacancy rates of 25%, online expenditure going up to £5 in every £10, 50% of expenditure online, and town centres have been particularly hard hit by the lockdown. Many town centre businesses failing, some of which would have failed in any event, I accept. But it'd be interesting to see what stimulus the government can offer to regenerate an already failing high street. Over to you.
Yeah, okay, great points, and absolutely what we're all thinking. You know, is Cheltenham going to look the same? Are these high streets going to look the same? Listen, I'm very, very robust about this. Pre-COVID, I was saying that where there was a fund that the government came up with, the town centre fund. I think it was about £400 million or so. And I said, in a place like Cheltenham, we have to grip the fact that things are going to change, and we have to take the opportunity that comes from the liability. What I really meant about that in practical terms is we have got a high street which is massively long. Someone once told me that it's the longest in the southwest. I don't know whether that's true. But the point is, there is an opportunity for us, I think, to kill two birds with one stone. And that means I think we should be looking very boldly and very strategically about whether you can redesignate parts of Cheltenham from a planning point of view. What I mean by that is this. At the moment, as I'm sure you know, everyone on this call knows, if you have a business premises that's got a certain planning code that's attached to it, and you can't then have that as a retail, as a residential premises. It's got to be business, and then there's one for restaurants, there's various B class and C class and all that kind of stuff. I think we should be looking very carefully at saying whether there are parts of the high street in Cheltenham, say, and it may be the lower high street, but I'm not, coming up with edicts about where it should be, where you should give the opportunity to those people who own those retail premises to turn them into resi. Now that kills two birds with one stone. From their point of view, they're happy because residential values are usually higher than retail. And second, it means that you start to bring online some more affordable housing for people who otherwise have to be accommodated in expensive housing elsewhere, out of town, or it increases the pressure to start chewing up the green belt. So I think we've got to think about those areas where perhaps younger people are more prepared to live in a town centre. So I think we should be thinking very robustly and strategically about the shape, the size, and the extent of our high street, recognizing that there is no way we are going to go back to the world as it existed in 2005. We were on a different path anyway, and this has simply shunted us further and faster along that path. I think the time has come for some strategic discussion about the shape of our high street. There will remain a high street, there will remain a town centre, but query whether it really needs to be quite as large as it currently is. Those are my thoughts.
I think just if I could just respond, I agree wholeheartedly with that. I would extend, however, beyond that and look at upper floors, and perhaps, as there have been with office to resi conversions, provide the same sort of relaxed planning rules for upper floor conversions, because I think, the future of retail is not above ground floor space.
Well, that's right. And in fact, a lot has happened on that already. There's a misconception that you're completely stuck in terms of the stuff above premises. But the law has relaxed on that, which I'm happy to pick up with you afterwards. But I entirely agree. But I just think that we are going to have to concentrate and optimize our retail offer over a smaller footprint. What we don't want is kind of dog-eared, gap-toothed high streets. That's not what we want. Much better to concentrate the retail in a really shiny, bright, attractive, appealing centre, rather than having it sort of spread out in a rather thin tissue, if you see what I mean.
Thank you very much. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, can you all make sure that your mics are on mute, please, if you're not going to talk? There's obviously a little bit of background there, so really appreciate that. So anyway, thanks ever so much for that, Alex. We go over to Sam Holliday now from the
FSB.
Hello, Sam.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for organising this, and hello, Alex.
Hi, Sam. Nice to see you again.
You too. As you'll be aware, the FSB has been supportive of virtually everything that the government has done, and we've been party to a lot of the discussions about furloughing and about grants, about bounce back loans, and the grants particularly, I think, are really worth highlighting. They've been amazing, and big credit to Cheltenham Borough Council and indeed all the councillors in Gloucestershire for getting out so much money so quickly. But if your inbox is anything like my inbox, you'll know that there's still a large group of people who feel that they haven't benefited enough. And that's the self-employed, those who are on the self-employed income scheme, whose scheme ends this weekend, and even more so perhaps the self-employed who pay themselves in dividends or are outside the threshold, who feel that they've not got any of this support. And what we're kind of worried about is that might dampen some of the enthusiasm for entrepreneurship amongst them. And I just wonder whether you detect any sign from the government, from the Treasury, that there will be any additional support for the self-employed, or should we be dampening down expectations in that direction.
Right. Okay, Sam, well, thank you very much indeed. Well, let me just be clear what I can and can't say. So I haven't spoken specifically to the Chancellor about this recently, but I can tell you the representations that I've made, and I'll be as helpful as I can. Particularly in respect of those folks who pay themselves via dividends, I am acutely sympathetic to this. I mean, I'm sure everyone on this call knows the problem, but let me just say very briefly what the situation is that if you're someone who set yourself up as a personal service company, it doesn't mean, by the way, that you're a plutocrat earning squillions. You might be, a guy or a girl with your van, you're going around, you're doing your stuff. And it may be that the people you contract with insist that you do it through a company, right? So that can be the situation. You then pay yourself a bit in PAYE. So the company pays you maybe £8,000 or so. And then you get the rest of your income, which might be something relatively modest, 30, 35,000 or whatever, in dividends, right? Now, the problem at the moment is that you can furlough yourself to the extent of 80% of your PAYE bit, but you can't get the dividend stuff. Now, the reason for that very simply is it's very difficult to ensure, sorry, hang on, someone's messaging me. It's very difficult to ensure that you're not then bringing a whole load of people into the compensation pot that you wouldn't sensibly be compensating for, you see what I mean? Because on the form, when you do your tax return, it says, right, this is what I've earned in dividends. It might say you put in 30,000 quid in dividends, but what the form doesn't know is whether that's £30,000 in dividends because you're a white van guy or girl driver, or whether it's £30,000 in dividends because you're a retiree sitting on £500,000 worth of stocks and shares. And plainly, the taxpayer should be expected to compensate the former or help out the former, but not necessarily the latter, because it's an open-ended liability that we can't sensibly afford to pay. So that is the difficulty. Now, you ask the question, what are you going to do about it? It's really difficult. I've raised this again and again and again, because, by the way, the people affected are the white van people I told about. Dentists, absolutely whacked by this. And people might say, who cares about dentists? But actually, these are entrepreneurs, they're business people very often, and they're doing an incredibly important job. So what can we do about it? Well, it was raised in the Treasury Select Committee, a guy called Mel Stride, who's a colleague of mine. He's taken up the cudgels on this. And I was pleased that he actually raised it in the liaison committee one. You know, the one that was hijacked by all the talk of Cummings and not hijacked, I'm not sorry. I don't mean that in a pejorative way. It was a very relevant and important thing to raise. But the one that was dominated, that's the right word, dominated by that. And he raised it in his question. And the PM said, yes, he was aware of it, and his officials were continuing to look into it. So that was positive. But I don't want to give people false hope, because frankly, although it's incredibly difficult, it's been a while now since this issue has been raised. I first raised it about 5, maybe even 6 weeks ago on behalf of a business in Cheltenham called Do It Yourself Pottery. Do you know the Cheltenham Pottery? It's a brilliant business. But anyway, and so all I can tell you is that there is a group of us, particularly on the WhatsApps, on the MP's WhatsApp, who are raising this. I'm somebody who's particularly keen on it because I recognise the difficulty for individuals, and I understand they're seized of it. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I couldn't give you any more than that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd just like to add one other thing, which I did raise to Richard Graham. I'm in that bracket myself. I pay myself in dividends. And I'm sure many of the people actually that I'm looking at right now also, yeah, but raise your hands, guys, if you pay yourself by divvies, if you don't mind.
Yeah, there you go. Patrick and all these people, yeah.
And the truth of the matter is that we were advised by our accountants to actually set up our businesses like this. And it wasn't because we were trying to diddle the tax man or anything like that. In fact, far from it. We're the entrepreneurs. Lots of small businesses like ourselves who might employ 2, 3, 5, 6 people, and in this situation where the government, it appears, doesn't really are trying to help us that much like that. I mean, yeah, I know. By the way, but it's just this thing that keeps popping up.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm so conscious of it. I really do feel that. And just last thing I'll say on it is that when I discuss this with other people, including with other MPs, people do leap to assume that it's a tax wheeze. And truth be told, 5 years ago, there was definitely a tax advantage to doing it that way, right? But because now you have to pay the corporation tax and then you pay the dividend rates as well, it's a distinction without a difference. It's a distinction without a difference. So whilst in the past, it may have been more advantageous, the reality is now people are advised to enter into it principally because people who want to do business with you insist on it. And that's why I'm particularly sympathetic. If it was just a tax wheeze, I'd say, well, that's just the risk of doing business. But I recognise it isn't that. Anyway, that you have my views on that.
No, that's great. Thank you very much for that, Alex. I'd like to move on to Kevan Blackadder, please. And after Kevan, it's going to be Chris Hickey. Sorry. So,
great, Kevan and Chris. I see more of you. I see more of you, Kevan, than I do of my wife.
I know the feeling, mate. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Alex. Just before I put my question, just picking up on the conversation with Alex and David, Cheltenham Bid is in complete agreement with you about the need to look for residential in town centre. I think the other advantage that you didn't touch on, Alex, is that it actually brings footfall into the town centre as well. But actually, the good news is that Cheltenham's relatively new head of planning at the Borough Council seems to agree. We've recently seen the upper floors of Radley converted to resi, and there's a new application in for Cambrai Place as well. So I think there'll be progress there. Anyway, on to my question. A bit like Sam and probably many other callers, I want some more of the government's money as well. We've been supporting the Raise the Bar campaign, which I have discussed with you in the past, Alex. But for those who don't know, there are many thousands of businesses across the country with rateable values between 51,000 and 150,000 who don't qualify for the grants that have been given so far to companies in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector. In Cheltenham alone, there's 149 companies that applies to, so hundreds across Gloucestershire. The campaign has seen 86 backbench Conservative MPs give their support to the call. Could I ask you as a minister if you're prepared to urge the government to change the regulations to help?
Yeah. Well, I've spoken to you about this, haven't I, Kevan? And I have raised it. Two things I'd say. First, and I know you're not saying anything different, we do have to recognise that the money that has been provided in terms of, first of all, not paying business rates, and second, this 24 million to Cheltenham is, by international standards, incredibly generous. And I think that's something that we have to take account of. I only say that because ultimately someone's going to have to pay for all this. And we have to make sure that what we're doing is designed for a key purpose, which is to keep the show on the road. Not just because sometimes people will need money, because of course we all need money, and some definitely really do need it, but it's to ensure that businesses aren't going bust. That's really what it's about. That's the first point. The second point is that you'll be aware that, not least because a number of MPs, maybe that 84 and others, have been making this point, that's why there's an additional sum of money that has gone into the pot at Cheltenham from government to Cheltenham Borough Council. I think it's a little over £1 million, which is a discretionary pot, which will be paid out to those to those hard cases. Now, I know, for example, that there's, I don't think you'll mind me saying it, like the old Restoration pub, I don't know if any of you know that, in Cheltenham, it's really good, went under new management, and it's like £52,000 or £53,000 rateable value. And what a nightmare for that poor guy, delightful bloke. He's facing a really tough time with it. So I know that the next consideration is whether those hard cases can be accommodated by potentially raising the bar, as you put it, a little bit. But at the risk of stating the obvious, what has to happen is you've got to recognise that if you raise it by a bit, the question is, how many businesses do you bring into scope, and therefore what is the cost of that? That's the calculation that has to be made. But I'm very alive to it, and I'm hopeful that this additional £1 million is going to address and mitigate some of the very urgent need which you're right to identify.
Thanks, Alex. I would just point out that one of the guidelines in the discretionary fund says that it applies to businesses with rateable values below 51,000. Well,
it does, but there is still an element of local discretion.
Correct.
There is an element of local discretion, and that's what we have to look at. But the final point I'll say is, we're all hopefully moderately intelligent human beings, and we also recognise that there are going to be hard boundary issues wherever you set the boundary, and that I'm afraid is a fact, as we all recognise. But nonetheless accept the point that you raised. Okay, where to next?
Okay, thanks very much. It's going to be Chris Hickey, changing the subject completely to our favourite car parking. Chris, woohoo. Step forward, sir, from Cheltenham HR. So, right, sir, your question, please.
Hi,
Great,
hi,
Chris
Alex. Yeah,
Hickey.
it is a relatively minor point, but I think one of my concerns, I've got a couple of clients who this affects in terms of the hospitality and nighttime economy, nighttime industry, is one of the things that could be done that we're calling for, and it's properly something to do with the Borough Council, but I think this business forum that we're talking to here and in others, simple change is to end car parking charges in Cheltenham at 6 p.m. Now they go on till 8 or 8:30. We desperately need to do something to enable and promote people to come into the town in the evenings to support that part of the economy that is really going to struggle to recover because of social distancing measures and so on and so forth. And I do understand the Borough Council got to find lots of money for income that it's lost, but this is a small measure and it's an important step. And it is a real sign to people that Cheltenham is coming back into business. Wonder what your thought is.
Well, Chris, it's an absolute delight to see you. I am in violent agreement with you about this point, and it's something that I've been saying for a long time. And in fact, I actually ran a campaign on this, right? And by the way, I am not about to start making political points because this is not the time. We're in the middle of a crisis, and this is about how we rebuild our economy and our country. But as a matter of fact, in February 2018, after there was a lot of pressure to do precisely that, free parking after 6 p.m., and also free parking on Sundays, mind you, because I think that would be great as well, is that actually the Borough Council, they voted to do that in February 2018, but it was never brought into force. There was a backtrack. They backtracked on it. And you know, this is not the time for party politics, but I can tell you, I completely agree with you, because here's the extraordinary thing. We've heard a lot about behavioural scientists over the course of this crisis, about how long people can endure the lockdown. It is one of the perverse realities of life that people will spend an insane amount of money on a skinny mocha cafe latte or whatever it is, but they don't like spending money on parking. They just don't like doing it, and it puts people off. And so what we've got to be doing is making it in people's interest to come in, park their car for a short period of time. First, so you've got to have cheaper parking during the day, but after 6 p.m. to just boost the economy. So I'm not going to just carry on because I agree with you, but this is something which we won the argument in 2018, and then they got the heebie-jeebies. The final point I'll make is the way you deal with the financial aspect of it, right? The way you deal with the financial aspect is that you recognize that there are going to be a whole load of town centre properties that are not going to be paying business rates because guess what? They can't survive. Get those inhabited, get people into them, change them, the planning, as I said before, so that those are resi, at least get some council tax off that. That's how you unlock a tranche of housing in the town centre for young people, make it a vibrant centre, as Kevan said, right? And then what you also do is you go gangbusters in respect of the cyber park, because that brings businesses in who pay those rates. So we've got to think commercially. For so long in Cheltenham has not been commercial. It's been like, oh, look, it's pretty, blah, blah, blah. No. We have the most expensive parking anywhere in Gloucestershire, not just by a bit, but by a country mile. That is not a good place for our town to be. We've got to sharpen our pencil. We've got to get competitive, get commercial, and bring people in.
Great. Glad to hear it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks ever so much. That's an excellent compliment. I think we all agree with that, actually.
It's so obvious.
Yeah, well, when I was chair of the FSB, I was always ranting and raving about car parking. Car parking and seagulls were always my bugbear, weren't they, Sam? Anyway, moving swiftly on. The next person up is actually the Chief Executive of Lillian Faithful, Martin Hughes. Hello, Martin.
Good afternoon, Mark, and afternoon, Alex. I've got two of my colleagues, Suzanne, our Director of Care, and Liam, our Director of Finance, with me as well.
Well, it's a pleasure. I've been in close correspondence with Lillian Faithful over the course of this process. I have, yeah.
So just a quick question. Could you help us and make some appropriate representations to Gloucestershire County Council that the 15.9 million that they've been allocated is going to be issued as soon as possible? They have a deadline of the end of today to publish what they've done with that money on their website, and it's not there yet. We're also having some difficulties in understanding in the care sector how we claim those funds. So far, we've been sent a 21-page deed of variation legal document, which we need to sign before we get any more money. 3 spreadsheets and a 10-page guidance of how we claim. And we can't have any of this money unless we agree this deed of variation, which means I need a lawyer.
Right, okay.
Actually, you could do that for me, Alex. We need a lawyer to check the legal agreement.
I can see there is Rowena Kay on the line, and she's an extremely distinguished lawyer, but she probably, I think she might be a recovering lawyer. I'm not sure. Anyway, whatever.
Sorry, I was just dealing with a chaos with my children. I've going to hurt my name.
That's all right. I just got you a brief. Anyway, never mind. So the short answer is, Martin, yes, I'm happy to make those inquiries. Just so I'm clear, is this 15.9, is this the money that was drawn down from Rishi's 750 million? Is that charities fund?
This is the first tranche of money given to the social care sector, which was the 3.2 billion that was split against each council.
All right. Yeah,
my concern is there's no way of Gloucestershire spent that 15.9 million yet. And I'd be very interested to see when they
What I'm going to do, I've got to jump off onto more calls later today, but I'm going to send a text message to my contact at GCC about it. But I'd like it very much if you could just follow up with an email for me, and then I will make sure that if I don't get an immediate response on the text, that I can follow up by email. Okay.
I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
No problem at all. No problem. When you do so, can you do me a favour? Can you reference the fact that we've had this conversation? Because then my office will put it in my personal email account.
Thank you. Will do. Thank you very much.
Great to see you, Martin, and all your team there as well. Okay. And Liam, where's Liam? I'm sorry about last week, mate. All right, moving swiftly on. Okay. Nigel Dowler's next. Okay, he's got a question, and then it's Mark Hutchinson. So Nigel, you'd like to have your question, please? Nigel from Director of Marketing Dimensions. Hi, Nigel.
Hello, Alex. Can you hear me?
Hello, I can hear you loud and clear. Yeah.
Good to meet you, and hello everybody else. We tend to specialise in business turnaround and commercialisation, so we're working on a digitisation project with a major university at the moment. We've just followed the government's 5-stage steps status on COVID safe, and that's actually been launched today through the press and to the future applicants, which is really interesting. So we can see a lot of positives that have been done with the government, and we're involved with CBI calls and Carolyn Fairburn doing some really good work to enable larger businesses. Some of our clients are also SMEs locally, Gloucestershire and in the region. And I guess the question is, thought at the moment with a number of these leaders is, what's the situation likely to be when we're going to be moving from a top-down lockdown to probably what is a bottom-up, the individual, through track and trace, that really will be the factor of, is my business still open? If I have a person who's tested and then have they been in the office, how's that dynamic going to work and change? Because I might be open one day and not open the next based on one individual, and the 24-hour wait for this. And I'm not trying to make life complicated, but there's a lot of detail, isn't there, ultimately, in how we work this through.
Yeah. Well, look, I think it's a great point, and it's one that others have mentioned, not least in the context of how government support might work in the future. Because what happens if basically you're employed and then you're suddenly off for 14 days isolation and so on. And that's a point that's been raised specifically with the Chancellor and the PM, and we're waiting for a response on that. They're certainly very alive to it. Now, I mean, the wider issue, though, is, look, there are no glib answers, and there are no glib answers whether it's to this or indeed to any of it. We are all, as individuals, going to have to slightly suck it and see, in the sense that we all know that we're moving to a kind of whack-a-mole strategy insofar as there are going to be local flare-ups, and they're going to have to be squashed. But those local flare-ups are going to happen not just, say, Cheltenham overall, but it's going to be a part of Cheltenham which is effectively going to be quarantined if it happens in a business. And let me just give you an example. I was speaking this morning to Stephen Marston at the University of Gloucestershire, and I was asking precisely this. What happens if in part of the workplace on that campus someone gets COVID? Does the whole hospital, does the whole university go down? And the short answer is that what that university has done, and this would be similar for other organisations, is it's got to work out what are the bubbles within the bubble, if you know what I mean. In other words, if person A gets sick from within that group, well, what's the little mini group that is therefore got to be isolated? And the reality is, it's going to have to be for individual firms to work out how their workforce is structured and how vulnerable they therefore are if someone within this part of the team goes down or elsewhere. But the key point is this, which you touched on very, very briefly, is this business about how quickly you get the test results back. So today I was actually just down at Gloucester at the Oxtalls campus, where the Army are, the Welsh regiment, Royal Welsh, sorry, are doing the testing, the Pillar 2 testing site. I think we're very likely, perhaps that's a bit dangerous, I think we're likely, let's leave it at that, I think we're likely to be getting a permanent testing site in Gloucestershire, which, if it's anything like this one, will be able to turn around tests really quite quickly. The troops down there were telling me they were getting results back in 24 hours. If that's the case, it's going to provide many more options for those people who are running businesses in terms of how they can keep things going if they have local flare-ups in their business.
Okay.
Good, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there are other kind of questions to follow on, but I don't want to sort of overtake the time you have today, but that's very insightful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Nigel. Thanks, Alex. Mark Hutchinson is next. Mark, can we have your question, please? Is Mark here? I thought we saw him coming along. Okay, we'll miss Mark out. We'll go straight on to Jonathan Moffitt.
Ah, Jonathan.
Hello, Alex. How are you doing there?
I'm very well. Nice to hear your dulcet tones.
Oh, they're dulcet.
Well, listen, everyone else will be the judge of that. But
thank you. I like flattery, but my question is very simple. How will a person know when they get a message, either an email, a call, or a text from NHS Test and Trace, that it's genuine? Because there's all these scams about.
Well, we've discussed this on the email, haven't we?
I know, but a bit more detail for everybody else would be helpful, or what they're going to do.
Yeah. Well, the short answer is, because I know you're doing very good work at SP Jara to ensure that particularly older people don't think it's a scam. There is now. What is this specific answer on that? I don't know what particular stuff they've got in there by way of fraud prevention. But look, I mean, if you're concerned, people will hand over personal details. What do you think is the particular risk?
There's two risks. One is the risk is that older people, particularly people who are, because it's all under the badge of the NHS, and therefore the NHS is trusted. There's the fear that scammers will use the NHS badge on a fake email or text or call, and then try and scam the person in some way by implying it's the NHS that's calling, and therefore it's an authoritative source. And
but what would the scam be? Because if all the scammer can say is, "Hi, I'm from the NHS,"
a fake URL without getting into technical details. The other risk is the other side. People think it's a scam when it's actually genuine.
Yeah. Well, look, I've written off to the DHSC about this point at your request, and look, to be honest, I'm not close enough to it to know what they've built in on that. But I would hope that if someone is calling up from the NHS and they say, "Look, I'm here from the NHS and I want you to self-isolate," well, that in and of itself, I don't think is open to a scam, because how does that help a scammer? Certainly, I hope you will tell your members that if anyone from the NHS calls up and asks people to hand over bank details or money, that is going to be a fraud, because no one from the NHS will do that. And second is that if there are fake URLs and so on, well then that's what I'm going to try and find out to see what availability, what is out there. But that's a matter really for the local police. And I tell you what, I think, why don't I raise this with the police to see what they're doing online to make sure that there aren't fraudsters
in their emails and on their website and stuff like that.
Right.
It could be helpful, because you don't want people to get scammed, and then they fear that this NHS Test and Trace is a ruse to be scammed, and then they start to distrust it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Fine. But listen, just in the short term, what would be really helpful is if you could say to your members, for goodness sake, don't hand over any cash to anyone who picks up the phone, because that's the biggest phishing stuff. Is people picking up the phone and gulling poor.
We have a document in the works and under review, and to be hopefully out in a few days. So I'm dealing happy with my members, but I'm trying to raising the subject here so other people tell their older members of their family and all that sort of stuff to be very aware of these sort of things.
Yeah, well, you're right. You're right to raise it, and I'm very grateful to you for doing so. And thank you for the volunteering work which you're doing for SPGR. I know it's hugely appreciated. So thank you.
Okay, thanks ever so much, Jonathan. That's great. Thank you, Alex. We're going to swiftly move on. It's Belinda next, but Belinda, your original question, do you think it was already answered? You're quite happy with that? Great stuff. So we're going to go on to Rowena. Okay, Rowena, are you there?
Hi, I am.
Hi, you are. Sorry, we just didn't mention your name, and then you.
I'm just getting at work.
From home.
My question was really about the environmental side, because I've seen, obviously, in your time as MP, you've championed quite a lot of environmental causes within Cheltenham. And there's been quite a lot of talk in the press about the need to take this as an opportunity for a green recovery. And so I was just wondering whether you had any particular thoughts on Cheltenham or the opportunities that might be available to us to move forward with those things hand in hand.
Yeah, well, I'm so grateful to you, Rina, for raising this, because one of the things people say rightly is we've got to build back better and so on. And people sometimes make the rather unhappy comparison with, the post-war period, particularly with those other countries where they had a kind of blank canvas and they thought, well, how can we build back better? I don't think it's quite as apocalyptic as that, but certainly this does present some opportunities. So yes, the top line stuff is, there's a bunch of money that Grant Shapps has announced, 200 and some odd million to do stuff. And that's great. And I'm really happy with that. Let's use the money and so on. But I really have felt for such a long time that if you just have a bit of noggin and will and energy about it, there is so much simple stuff you can do to make Cheltenham a better place to get around for active travel. Now, I declare an interest. I cycle absolutely everywhere, but I don't want to be a complete bore about this because I've been accused of being a cycling bore. But if you had more people on bikes, right, I have absolutely no doubt in my waters that we would be a happier, healthier community, because the government can stand in number 10 all it wants and says, right, well, after the Olympics, we're all going to be playing football on Wednesdays, and then we're going to play hockey on. It just doesn't happen because people are busy. They're busy paying their mortgage, rowing with their partner, whatever it is. They're just busy doing all these things. And so I feel very strongly that you've got to weave exercise into transport. That is it's health by stealth. That's what you've got to do. Right. It doesn't need a shed load of cash, as a matter of fact. It needs a bit of bravery, political courage, because as soon as you put a cycle lane in, people go absolutely ballistic, right? So you're going to have the political courage to do it. And second, you're just going to have to open your eyes. What I mean by that is there are so many places in Cheltenham where if you were to put down what I call a semi-permeable bike lane, which would encourage more women to cycle, because painted roads don't encourage women to cycle. It's a fact. It might be sexist, but it has the advantage of being true. You have to have some segregation of the cycle lane. And you could do it, for example, where I live, just by Spirax Sarco in Charlton Kings, I take the kids and I want to cycle into town. I won't cycle with the kids into town because even though there's a massively wide pavement there, there's no cycle lane at all. You could easily put in a cycle lane there. And here's the last point I'll make on this. Let us never make perfect the enemy of the good. So all too often, we sit here waiting for some flat-packed Rolls-Royce perfect scheme to come along, and then no, don't bother with that. What we should be doing is incrementally saying, we're going to put in a bit of a roadway there for bikes. We're going to improve that junction. We're going to do this. And then over time, it becomes a more pleasant environment. Last point, if you go to my office in Henrietta Street, right, some of it is signage. If you go down Henrietta Street from north to south, there is a sign which says, cyclists turn left. If you turn left, you will go straight into the path of an oncoming bus, right? So there is some stupid stuff like that. You could just change the signage and do it. So I get fed up with lots of people saying, oh, can't do it, it's all too difficult. Oh, it's the county council's fault, or it's the borough council's fault, or it's the government's fault. It's just a collective failure of will. Just get on and do it.
Okay, fantastic.
There you go.
Fantastic offer. Someone had to mention Dominic Cummings. Unfortunately, I know. I'd actually had it up to here, but it is open to everybody. So I actually have
Yeah.
Chris.
It's a very fair question.
It is, yeah, of course it is. Chris, would you like to ask you a question, please?
Yeah, hi, Alex. So originally it was, stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. These are not requests, these are rules. And, obviously that's slightly terrifying, but it was great to hear a really clear, concise message from the Prime Minister, Matt Hancock and other medics.
Yeah.
I was really obviously disappointed with your colleague, Mr. Cummings, but I'm more disappointed in the wider Conservatives that are wholeheartedly supporting him, because I believe that by supporting him, that reduces the authority of important future messages from the government and will cost lives. So after all, if he can ignore and disregard the messaging, so can I. So the Prime Minister supports Mr. Cummings. Do you support Mr. Cummings? Or is your position in line with an increasing number of your backbench colleagues who feel his position at the heart of the government damages the messaging, makes it harder for the police, harder for the NHS, and will cost lives?
Well, look, on the issue of whether it costs lives, let me say this. The 2 worst weeks of my life in politics have both in some way involved Dominic Cummings, right? The first one was the prorogation, and the second one was this one. And I was just remarking upon that to my neighbour just a few minutes ago. Look, so far as whether it will affect lives, the thing that I have been very struck by, certainly in my mailbag, but also speaking to people, is that people are very, very mindful when they watch those briefings on TV about the R rate and the number of infections and so on, and they listen very carefully. They know fine well we are on a bit of a cusp here, right? So that the R rate is said to be between 0.7 and 0.9. They recognise that if people don't have the social distancing and so on, that this could get out of hand, we could have another lockdown and so on and so forth. My strong sense is that whilst I entirely accept this has been an extremely unhappy episode, that the British people, I think, are alive to that, and I think will observe what is asked of them. That's certainly what I've detected so far, but the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. Let's see. You may end up being right, but I hope and suspect you won't be. As for what my position is, I think a lot of us, in those vainglorious moments where you imagine if you were Prime Minister, might have thoughts about how you would go about dealing with things. But I accept, right? I am a minister in the government, and that means that there are certain things I can make private representations, which I have, but public denunciations I would have to leave the government to do. Now, I could do, and you could turn around and say, right, Alex, put your money where your mouth is. You should resign from being at the Ministry of Justice so that you can denounce the Barnard Castle visit. I could do that. But let's just think about what that would actually mean. So, for example, next week, for example, I've got the domestic abuse bill, which is right in the middle of committee stage. So if I stop, that someone else has got to pick that up. That is legislation that is going to have a massive impact on improving the lives of people who suffer from domestic abuse. It's the third time I've asked we need to get that through. That's one example, but there's every other number.
But you're going off track. The
question is whether I'm about to come out and say, resign my post so that I can condemn the decision of the Prime Minister to keep him on. And that's not something that I think it would be proportionate or in the public interest to do. Do I have my private views about every aspect of what he did? Of course I do. But I cannot, consistent with collective responsibility, make public denunciations. That is the judgment that I have to make. Do I want to resign in order to denounce? And the answer is I'm not prepared to do that. I don't think it would be in the public interest to do so.
Okay, let's move on.
So you're not prepared to say whether you support Mr. Cummings or whether you don't support him.
It's not about.
Over 1,000 emails last week. This must be the biggest mailbag you've ever had.
It is.
Yet you're not prepared to get off the fence.
Chris, it is the biggest mailbag I've ever had. But ultimately, the decision on Dominic Cummings is a decision for the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has decided he's going to stay, whatever representations people have made. And I just don't think I can take that any further. That is the decision that has been made. If I were Prime Minister, who knows what the decision would have been? But that is the decision that he's made.
Certainly we don't know what the decision would have been if you'd been Prime Minister, because you're not prepared to share your view, which I'm hugely disappointed with. I don't think that's
I think that's fair. But I understand what you say and the reason why you say it.
I don't think you guys are going to agree, to be honest with you, anyway. So let's agree not to agree. Moving on. Nadia, you had a question.
Hello, I had to unmute myself.
Hello.
I have a question, and that's mainly for new companies, new businesses wanting to set up now in Cheltenham. Are there any grants available locally? Because we seem to be in a strange location where we're not quite in the Midlands, not quite in the Southwest. So what sort of help is available for new startups in Cheltenham? Thank you.
Well, what grants for new startups in Cheltenham? I think it really depends on the area in which you're seeking to start up. May I ask, Nadia, what your sector is?
I'm a chartered accountant, and I'm talking mainly for my clients or prospective clients.
Yeah, well, I meet very regularly with, relatively regularly with the banks, and they talk about obviously their own particular products. And I know that that obviously if you go down and speak to the LEP, have you spoken to G First LEP? Because they very often have access to grant funding as well. They would be a good people to go and speak to. Do you know Diane Savory or David Owen? But they are very well plugged in, because one of the things we're reasonably well served by here in Gloucestershire is there are the hubs down at the Auditel campus where they can provide quite a lot of business support for individuals, and particularly supporting them in terms of whatever their best stream of funding may be. And there is quite a lot out there, but you really need to go to the right place to unlock it. So they've got quite a good system down there of business mentoring, for example. So I know this because my wife was going to set up a business and tried them out. And so you can be allocated someone from the particular area that you're in, and they can help support you both in terms of your business plan, but second, in terms of the kind of startup seed funding that might assist you before you get investors in. So that's would be my advice to you, is send them down to the Auditel campus, G First LEP.
And I can help you there as well. I was talking to Start and Grow Enterprise from the LEP, Sage, Natalie Ferrari. I'll put you in touch with her if you like, and she'll put you in the right direction. Okay, thank you ever so much. Okay, we've got gone through all the questions. We've done extremely well. Actually, we've got 7 minutes left, so we'll go back over to David Jones from Evans Jones, sponsors today. So David had a second question, so I'm going to throw it back over to David.
Many thanks, Mark. I think one of my second questions was answered over the Brompton Cycle Superhighway, so I won't go there again, Alex.
Okay, no problem at all.
The utilisation of premises, whether these be offices, schools, colleges, factories, etc., will change. Certainly, my own surveyor's assessment is that COVID-compliant office occupancy will be down to around 30, possibly up to 50% of normal occupancy rates. Home working has risen from pre-lockdown rates of 5% up to 50% in April. Does the government intend to consider any additional assistance for businesses to make reasonable adjustments within the workplace and or provide incentives for home working? And perhaps for an example, to bring forward plans for upgrade of 5G and high-speed internet across the UK? Thank you.
Yes, well, I mean, look, certainly from that point of view, pre-COVID, you may be aware, or you may recall, although it seems a lifetime ago now, that in the budget, Rishi Sunak's budget, one of the things that he talked about was the money that is going to be invested to fulfill a manifesto promise in respect of 5G, the 5G rollout. And the reason why the Huawei issue has been so vexed is because that is, of course, one of the vehicles for trying to deliver that 5G rollout. But the bottom line is, whether it's Huawei or whether it's other providers, there is £5 billion that has been allocated for precisely that. And you know, that's why, so the short answer to your question is, I think that the principal impetus, financial impetus, and impetus from government to try to achieve what it is that you're talking about, I think is principally going to be in a macro infrastructure way, rather than in a micro sort of subsidizing individual businesses way. In other words, creating the infrastructure in the form of 5G, as you've referred to allow people to be more flexible in the way that they operate. So I think that ultimately is going to be is going to be the tip of the spear, if you like. I think that's going to be the centre of effort in respect of this new home working. But I feel very, very strongly that although there are sectors, and I see this in particularly in the legal world that I'm involved in, which are never going to change. You're going to have to meet in person. Obvious ones being jury trial. But although some people have talked about whether you could have trial by jury remotely, for example, of course, this is slightly different from business, but I'll make the point that that's always going to be the case. But there are a whole lot of hearings which people have now recognised you can do remotely, and I think the business stigma of doing it remotely is evaporating. So look, I think that 5G is going to be rolled out. That's going to be the principal support for allowing more remote working. And I think we've seen the cultural genie has left the bottle, which isn't going to go back in anytime soon.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to throw it open a little bit. In fact, I'm going to ask Steve Gardner-Collins. Steve, sorry, there. Just thought I'd bring you in because obviously you're heavily involved in the hospitality sector.
Yes.
Have you got anything at all that you'd like to throw into the mix here? With I'm so sorry to give you sort of no warning whatsoever.
Yeah, none at all. Sorry,
is there anything you'd like to a point that you'd like to make to Alex or to the rest of the Zoom followers? Zoom room?
Of course. I've shared in the chat actually Visit Gloucestershire, and obviously was on the news yesterday to kind of launch it really and put it into the public domain. Visit Gloucestershire, as Alex knows, is something that I'm really passionate about, pulling Gloucestershire together, hence the hashtag. I spoke to Alex yesterday at a similar forum and we talked about Cheltenham's hospitality. It is very much a restaurant, bar, festivals town. I'm really mindful that between now and certainly without a vaccine and going into next year, the impacts and the implications of the virus and getting everything back opened up. Somebody was just talking about Bath Road, and the distancing on the paths is a big concern outside shops. How Cheltenham pieces itself back together and how the cyber and its future balances off with the benefits to Gloucestershire is also something that Alex and I talked about yesterday. So I haven't got any specific questions for Alex. I'm really grateful that you've allowed me to share the news about Visit Gloucestershire, and I'm really keen for everybody to get involved. We're just about to launch the partnership support hub, which will go live next week, and that incorporates into the leisure and tourism sector a support around all the different businesses in the county that can work together and therefore provide support and training and one-to-one, open up all those skills that's great about Gloucestershire so that we all work together. I've just shared a piece actually on localism today. Again, really keen that the town focuses on how it remains locally focused amongst community and all those businesses that have adapted.
And can I just say one thing about that actually? And I really endorse what you're doing and I'm enthusiastic about it, and I congratulate you for the energy that you're showing. One of the things that I've found really exciting as well in this lockdown is there's been an increased effort at trying to sell where we live. If you look at the Instagram feed about for Cheltenham, it's what's it called? I can't remember what the site is now, but it's just fantastic what's going on social media in terms of promoting Cheltenham and Gloucestershire more widely. So I think people have really they've rebonded with where they live, and I feel that we will emerge from this place with a strong sense of local identity, which we want to sell. And I think we've got a great offer in Cheltenham. We should never forget that. Everywhere in the country is going to be hit by all this. Everywhere is, but we have an extraordinary offer that I think outflanks a great many other people. We just got to make sure if we get some of the basics right, like parking, as we talked about, like making it a good place to get around, like getting the infrastructure in place, then there's no reason why in this post-COVID world we can't go absolutely pedal to the metal. And I think it can be a very, very exciting future, even if we've got to get a bit over a fairly significant hump in the short term. There's a great future to have.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap all this up, a real sort of rallying cry for Cheltenham and for Gloucestershire. We live in a fantastic county, and what I've always been impressed with as the editor of Punchline is how many people are so enthusiastic, involved, actually, trying to do the right thing for the county, working for charities, working for business, working together. So I'd just like to say a big thank you for all of you for joining. A big thank you to Alex as well. It must be a tremendously difficult time to be in Parliament at this particular moment. Don't envy your job at all, sir. So a big thank you to you for everything that you do for Cheltenham, Alex. And I'd just like to thank you all for reading Punchline. I'd just like to say we reached the milestone of 198,000 readers last month. I think we're going to top that this month. 1.3 million pages were read last month as well. So thank you ever so much for being involved. We have got the rest of the MPs to come on board, and you'll hear from us very soon once we get that date in the diary. But a big thank you once again to all of you. A big thank you again to Evans Jones, which we couldn't do without you guys. And absolutely tremendous. And goodbye. Be safe. Have a great weekend. Thank you.